The summer sun beat down on us as we loaded our bags into the SUV, ready for our long-awaited family trip. Richard, my husband of 35 years, barked orders like a drill sergeant. "Joanna, make sure you pack the cooler with enough drinks and snacks for the drive, and don't forget the maps and directions." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to remind him that I'd been planning this trip for months. As usual, he assumed I'd handle all the logistics while he reaped the rewards. Sylvia, Richard's mother, emerged from the house, her face pinched in disapproval. "Are we ready to go yet? You know how I hate waiting." I forced a smile. "Just about. Michael and Rebecca should be here any minute." As if on cue, my son and daughter-in-law pulled into the driveway. Michael gave me a sympathetic look, well aware of the tension between his father and me. We piled into the SUV, and I settled into the passenger seat, ready for the long drive ahead. But as we merged onto the highway, I overheard a hushed conversation from the back. "Once we're settled at the cabin, we'll have that talk with Joanna," Sylvia murmured to Richard. My heart sank. Talk? What were they planning? Richard's voice was low, but I caught the gist. "It's for the best, Mother. She'll never see it coming." "See what coming?" A knot formed in my stomach as I realized they were conspiring against me on what was supposed to be a joyful family vacation. The drive passed in tense silence, punctuated only by Sylvia's occasional snide remarks. By the time we reached the cabin, my nerves were frayed. As we unloaded our bags, Richard pulled me aside. "Joanna, we need to talk." I steeled myself, determined not to show weakness. "About what?" He glanced around, his expression guarded. "Not here. Let's go for a walk." We strolled along a nearby trail, the evening shadows lengthening around us. Finally, Richard spoke. "Mother and I have been discussing our living situation. With her health declining, she needs more care than I can provide on my own." I nodded, unsure where this was leading. "We've decided it would be best if she moved in with us permanently. That way, you can take care of her needs." My jaw dropped. "You expect me to become a full-time caregiver for your mother, without even consulting me?" Richard's eyes hardened. "It's the logical solution. You're retired and I'm still working. Who else is going to do it?" I shook my head in disbelief. "And what about my needs, Richard? Don't those matter at all?" He scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic. This is what families do. We take care of each other." But his words rang hollow. In that moment, I realized our marriage had become a sham, a facade of obligation rather than love or respect. As we returned to the cabin, Sylvia greeted us with a smug smile. She knew exactly what was happening, and she relished her victory. That night, as I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, my mind raced. How had I let things spiral so far out of control? When had I stopped being Richard's partner and become little more than a servant? I thought of the dreams I'd once had, traveling, pursuing hobbies, enjoying my retirement. All of it had been sacrificed on the altar of duty and obligation. But as the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, a newfound determination took root within me. I would no longer be a passive bystander in my own life. It was time to take a stand. The cabin's rustic charm did little to soothe my frayed nerves as we settled in for the night. Richard and Sylvia acted as if nothing was amiss, chatting amiably about the scenic views and plans for hiking the next day. Their nonchalance only fueled my growing sense of unease. After dinner, I excused myself and retreated to the bedroom I was sharing with Richard. Closing the door behind me, I sank onto the edge of the bed, my mind racing. What were they plotting against me, and why? Memories flooded back. The countless times I'd put my own dreams on hold to cater to Richard's needs, the way Sylvia had always treated me like an intruder in her precious son's life. Had I been so blinded by a misguided sense of duty that I'd missed the cracks in our family's foundation? A muffled voice from the living room snapped me out of my reverie. I strained to listen, recognizing Richard's hushed tones. "Can't go on like this, Mother. She's become a burden." My heart pounded in my ears as Sylvia's raspy voice responded. "I told you she was never good enough for my son. We need to take action before it's too late." Take action? A chill ran down my spine. Were they planning to get rid of me somehow? I crept closer to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Their voices grew clearer, the words like knives twisting in my gut. "We'll have to be discreet," Richard murmured. "Michael can never find out the truth." My son's name sent a jolt through me. They were going to lie to him, to turn him against me. Tears stung my eyes as I realized the depth of their betrayal. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in shock and disbelief. When Richard finally entered the bedroom, his expression was carefully neutral. "You should get some rest," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Big day tomorrow." I watched him disappear into the bathroom, my mind whirling. I couldn't confront him, not yet. Not until I had a plan. That night, as Richard's soft snores filled the room, I lay awake, plotting my next move. I would not go down without a fight. These people who claimed to be my family had shown their true colors, and it was time I did the same. As the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, I felt a newfound sense of determination. No more playing the dutiful wife and mother. From now on, I would be the master of my own destiny. Over breakfast, I studied Richard and Sylvia, watching for any hint of their sinister intentions, but they maintained their facade of normalcy, discussing the day's activities as if nothing were amiss. "I thought we could go for a hike this morning," Richard suggested, his tone deceptively casual. "Get some fresh air before the heat sets in." I forced a smile, playing along for now. "Sounds lovely." As we set off into the woods, I hung back, allowing Richard and Sylvia to take the lead. Michael and Rebecca trailed behind, their hushed conversation a comforting backdrop. Sylvia's voice carried back to me, sharp and condescending. "Honestly, Richard, I don't know how you put up with her. She's dead weight, dragging you down." My fists clenched at her cruel words, but I remained silent, biding my time. Richard's response was muffled, but I caught the gist. "Don't worry, Mother. Soon she'll be out of our lives for good." A wave of anger washed over me, hot and consuming. How dare they? After everything I'd sacrificed, this was how they repaid me. In that moment, a plan began to take shape in my mind. A plan for revenge, for justice. They thought they could cast me aside like an unwanted burden? Well, they had another thing coming. As we reached a scenic overlook, I hung back, allowing the others to admire the view. While their backs were turned, I slipped away, retracing our steps back toward the cabin. It was time to take control of my life, once and for all. I watched Richard and Sylvia disappear down the hiking trail, their voices fading into the distance. As soon as they were out of sight, I sprang into action, hurrying back to the cabin. My heart pounded as I slipped inside, scanning the living area for any sign of their belongings. A leather briefcase sat on the coffee table, and I recognized it as Richard's. Without hesitation, I unzipped it, rifling through the contents. Financial statements, legal documents, and letters. My breath caught in my throat as I unfolded one, the looping handwriting unmistakably feminine. The words leapt off the page, searing into my brain. "My dearest Richard, our stolen moments together are all that sustain me." I stumbled back, the room spinning around me. An affair? After all these years of loyalty and sacrifice, he'd been unfaithful? Bile rose in my throat as I continued reading, the sordid details laying bare the depth of his betrayal. And there were more letters, each one more damning than the last. Tears blurred my vision as I turned to the financial records, my hands trembling. Line after line of unexplained expenditures and hidden accounts, proof that Richard had been bleeding our savings dry right under my nose. The sound of laughter drifted in from outside, and I froze, panic gripping me. Michael and Rebecca must have returned from the hike. I had to act fast. Snatching up the incriminating evidence, I raced to the bedroom and began stuffing my belongings into a suitcase. My mind raced, formulating a plan. I couldn't confront Richard and Sylvia here, not with Michael caught in the crossfire. No, I needed to get away, to gather my strength and decide my next move. As I zipped up the suitcase, a familiar voice called out from the living room. "Mom, are you in here?" "Michael?" My heart clenched at the concern in his tone. He deserved to know the truth, but not yet. Not until I was ready to face the fallout. "I'm just resting, honey," I called back, willing my voice to remain steady. "I'll be out in a bit." Silence, then the murmur of Rebecca's soothing tones as she ushered him away. Bless that girl for her intuition. With shaking hands, I scribbled a hasty note, tucking it into Richard's briefcase, along with the damning evidence. Then, gripping my suitcase tightly, I slipped out the back door and into the waiting rental car. As I peeled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of Michael and Rebecca on the porch, their expressions puzzled. A pang of guilt twisted in my gut, but I pushed it aside. They would understand in time. For now, I had a mission: to gather the strength and resources I'd need to bring my husband and his vile mother to their knees. They thought they could discard me like a worn-out rag? Well, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The miles stretched out before me, and with each one I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. No more playing the dutiful wife, the obedient daughter-in-law. From this moment on, I would be the master of my own destiny. And Richard and Sylvia? They were going to pay for every single slight, every betrayal, every ounce of disrespect they'd heaped upon me over the years. I would see to that, no matter what it took. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I allowed a grim smile to crease my lips. The game was on, and they had no idea what was coming for them. I drove in a daze, the miles blurring together as I put distance between myself and that wretched cabin. My hands shook on the steering wheel, a potent mix of anger and adrenaline coursing through my veins. How could he? How could Richard betray me like this after everything we'd been through? The letters burned in my mind, their sordid details searing into my brain like acid. And Sylvia, that vile woman, had been in on it the whole time, no doubt reveling in my humiliation. Well, they were going to regret the day they ever crossed me. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, I pulled into a nondescript motel, my body thrumming with nervous energy. I needed to regroup, to formulate a plan for my next move. The dingy room did little to calm my frayed nerves, but I forced myself to take deep breaths, willing my racing heart to slow. Sinking onto the sagging mattress, I reached for my phone with trembling fingers. Richard's number glared back at me from the screen, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. Oh, how the tables had turned. No more would I be the obedient little wife scurrying to answer his every beck and call. This time, he would be the one squirming, forced to face the consequences of his actions. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Just as I was about to hang up, his gruff voice crackled over the line. "Joanna, where the hell are you? Your son is worried sick." I bristled at his tone, that familiar mix of condescension and entitlement. Not anymore. "Save it, Richard," I spat. "I know everything. About the affairs, the money you've been siphoning off. I have proof." Silence, thick and heavy, stretched between us. Then a low chuckle that sent ice shooting through my veins. "So what?" he sneered. "You really think anyone will believe the ramblings of a bitter, delusional old woman?" White-hot rage licked at my insides, but I forced myself to remain calm, to keep my voice level. "I'm not the one who's delusional, Richard. You and your mother have been playing me for a fool for far too long. Well, those days are over." Another pause, and when he spoke again, his words were laced with venom. "You ungrateful bitch, after everything I've done for you, for this family? You're going to regret this." A harsh laugh burst from my lips. "No, Richard, you're the one who's going to regret it. Every single lie, every betrayal, every ounce of disrespect you've heaped upon me. You're going to pay for it all. I promise you that." His response was a torrent of profanity and vitriol, but I barely heard it. A sense of grim determination had settled over me, hardening my resolve. "Don't bother coming after me," I warned, cutting off his tirade. "And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep your distance from our son. This is just the beginning, Richard. The gloves are off now." With that, I ended the call, a strange sense of calm washing over me. For the first time in decades, I felt in control of my own destiny. Grabbing a pen and paper, I began to make a list: names, numbers, resources. I would need allies in the battle to come, people I could trust to have my back. Jane, my oldest and dearest friend, would be the first. She'd been urging me to leave Richard for years, and I knew she would be in my corner without question. Next, a lawyer, a shark in the courtroom who could help me navigate the legal quagmire that was sure to come. I had evidence of Richard's misdeeds, but I would need an expert to ensure it stuck. As the list grew, I felt a newfound sense of purpose taking root within me. No more would I be the downtrodden, disrespected wife. Richard and Sylvia had awoken a sleeping giant, and they were about to feel the full force of my wrath. A grim smile tugged at my lips as I made the final entry on the list. Michael. My son. My rock. The one person in that twisted family who had always had my back. It was time to bring him into the fold, to let him know that the games were over. Together, we would take down the Machiavellian forces that had been working to destroy us. And when the dust settled, well, let's just say Richard and Sylvia would be the ones regretting the day they ever crossed Joanna Henderson. I pulled up to Michael and Rebecca's cozy bungalow, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. Would my son understand the agonizing decision I'd made, or would he side with his father, blinded by years of manipulation? Taking a deep breath, I gathered my things and made my way to the front door, my knuckles rapping against the weathered wood. Seconds ticked by like hours before Rebecca's smiling face appeared. "Joanna, we were so worried when you took off like that. Come in, come in." Her cheerful demeanor faltered as she took in my haggard appearance, the suitcase clutched in my white-knuckled grip. "Is everything okay?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. Michael's concerned voice drifted in from the living room. "Mom, is that you?" He rounded the corner, and I saw the moment the truth dawned on him. The suitcase, my red-rimmed eyes, the grim set of my jaw. His expression shifted from confusion to dread. "What's going on? Where's Dad?" Rebecca laid a gentle hand on his arm, her gaze flicking between us. "Why don't we all sit down?" We settled onto the plush sofa, an oppressive silence hanging in the air. Michael's eyes bored into me, pleading for an explanation. Drawing a shaky breath, I began to speak, the words tumbling out in a torrent. "Your father, he's been unfaithful, Michael, for years, by the looks of it. And not just that, he's been bleeding our finances dry, funneling money into secret accounts." Michael's brow furrowed as he processed my words. "What? That can't be right. Dad would never." His voice trailed off as I pulled out the crumpled letters, the bank statements detailing the missing funds. Wordlessly, I handed them over, watching as his eyes scanned the damning evidence. "Oh, Mom." His shoulders slumped, and I saw the exact moment the truth hit him, like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away, straightening my spine. "That's not all, honey. Your grandmother was in on it. They were planning to force me out, to make me your father's full-time caregiver while he carried on with God knows who." Rebecca's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room as Michael digested this latest bombshell. His expression darkened, and I recognized the flicker of anger in his eyes. Anger on my behalf. "Those bastards," he muttered, his fists clenching. "How could they do this to you, to our family?" I reached out, covering his hand with mine. "It doesn't matter now. What's done is done. I've made my decision. I'm leaving your father. I can't live like that anymore, constantly disrespected and manipulated." A muscle ticked in Michael's jaw as he processed my words. I could see the war raging within him, the desire to support me, battling against years of ingrained loyalty to his father. Finally, he met my gaze, his eyes shining with a fierce determination that made my heart swell with pride. "You're right, Mom. This ends now. Dad and Grandma," he shook his head, jaw clenched. "They've gone too far this time. I'm with you, 100%. Whatever you need, I'm here." A weight lifted from my shoulders as Rebecca nodded her agreement, squeezing Michael's hand. In that moment, I knew everything would be okay. With my son and his wife in my corner, I could weather any storm Richard and Sylvia threw my way. Reaching out, I pulled Michael into a fierce embrace, blinking back grateful tears. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing me, for having my back." As I held my son close, I felt a newfound sense of strength coursing through me. The path ahead would be rocky, but I was no longer alone. With Michael and Rebecca by my side, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Richard and Sylvia had made a grave miscalculation. They had underestimated the bond between a mother and her child, and now they would pay the price for their betrayal. The war had begun, and I had no intention of losing. With Michael and Rebecca's unwavering support, I felt a newfound sense of strength and determination. It was time to reclaim my life, to shed the shackles of Richard and Sylvia's manipulation once and for all. The first order of business was finding a place of my own, a sanctuary where I could begin to heal and plan my next steps. Michael insisted on helping me search, and within a week, we'd found the perfect little apartment in a quiet neighborhood. As I unpacked my belongings, filling the bare shelves and walls with pieces of my life, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. This was my space, my refuge from the toxicity that had plagued me for far too long. Of course, Richard didn't take my departure lying down. He showed up at Michael's doorstep, red-faced and bellowing, demanding to know where I was. "She's your mother, for God's sake," he raged at Michael. "You're supposed to be loyal to your family, not that ungrateful harpy." But Michael stood firm, his jaw set in that stubborn line I knew so well. "Mom's the only family I need right now. You and Grandma have done enough damage." Richard's eyes narrowed, and I could see the gears turning in his mind, searching for a way to regain control. "Don't be so quick to judge, son. You haven't heard the full story." "I've heard enough," Michael shot back. "Mom showed me the letters, the bank statements. I know exactly what kind of man you are." For a moment, Richard faltered, his bravado slipping. Then his expression hardened, and he jabbed a finger in Michael's face. "Mark my words, you're going to regret this. When your mother's lies come crashing down around her, don't come crawling back to me." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving a ringing silence in his wake. Michael's shoulders slumped, and I could see the toll this was taking on him. Crossing the room, I pulled him into a fierce hug. "Thank you," I murmured. "Thank you for standing by me." He returned the embrace, his voice thick with emotion. "Always, Mom. I'm with you till the end." In the weeks that followed, I focused on settling into my new life, unpacking, decorating, exploring my neighborhood. With each passing day, I felt a little more like myself, the weight of Richard and Sylvia's toxicity slowly lifting from my shoulders. Of course, they didn't make it easy. Richard bombarded me with calls and texts, alternating between pleading for me to come home and hurling vicious insults. Sylvia was no better, leaving scathing voicemails that made my blood boil. But I stood firm, bolstered by Michael and Rebecca's constant support. I knew that if I wavered, even for a moment, Richard would seize the opportunity to reel me back in, and I refused to let that happen. Not after everything I'd been through. The final straw came a few months later when Michael called me in a panic. "Mom, you need to get over here. Dad's gone off the deep end." I raced over to find Richard ranting and raving on Michael's doorstep, his face contorted with rage. "You're making a huge mistake, siding with that lying witch," he spat as I approached. "She's poisoned you against your own family." Sylvia hovered nearby, wringing her hands and shooting me venomous glares. For once, I felt no fear, only a simmering anger at the way they continued to try and manipulate us. Planting myself in front of Richard, I met his glare head-on. "That's enough. You've had your chance to tell your side of the story, and Michael hasn't bought your lies. It's over, Richard. We're done." His face purpled with rage, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But Michael stepped forward, his broad frame imposing. "You heard her, Dad. It's time for you to leave, and if you can't respect our decisions, you're no longer welcome here." The fight seemed to go out of Richard all at once. His shoulders slumped, and he shot me one last withering glare. "Have it your way, but don't come crying to me when this all blows up in your face." As he and Sylvia retreated, I felt an immense sense of relief wash over me. That chapter of my life was finally closed, the shackles of their manipulation broken for good. Turning to Michael, I pulled him into a fierce hug, blinking back grateful tears. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." He held me close, his voice thick with emotion. "You've got nothing to thank me for, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." And in that moment, I knew it was true. Richard and Sylvia had done their damnedest to break me, but I had emerged from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever before. At long last, I was free. With Richard and Sylvia finally out of our lives, Michael, Rebecca, and I were able to find some semblance of peace. But I knew it wouldn't last, not with the way they had been carrying on. Sooner or later, they would try to reassert their twisted control over the family. My chance for closure came a few months later, when Emma's 85th birthday rolled around. Despite the strained relations, Sylvia still expected the entire clan to gather and celebrate. I could only imagine the venom she would spew if Michael and I failed to show. Part of me wanted to take the high road, to let the past be the past. But a larger part, the part that had endured decades of disrespect and manipulation, craved justice. This would be my opportunity to expose Richard and Sylvia's misdeeds before the entire family. So with Michael and Rebecca's support, I agreed to attend the party. As we made our way to Sylvia's sprawling estate, I could feel the tension crackling in the air, thick as soup. Emma greeted us at the door, her perpetual sneer firmly in place. Well, well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter-in-law, she sneered. I must say, you've got a nerve showing your face here after the way you've treated my sister. I opened my mouth to respond, but Michael beat me to it, his voice low and dangerous. That's enough, Aunt Emma. We're here to celebrate your birthday, not listen to your venom. Her eyes widened at his tone, but she stepped aside, allowing us to pass. The gathering was already in full swing, with clusters of well-heeled guests milling about, sipping cocktails and making polite small talk. Sylvia spotted us immediately, her face contorting into a rictus of rage. She started toward us, no doubt intending to unleash a torrent of abuse, but Richard caught her arm, whispering urgently in her ear. For a moment, I thought they might cause a scene right then and there. But Sylvia seemed to rein in her temper, shooting me a look of pure venom before plastering on a sickly sweet smile. "Joanna, darling, how lovely of you to join us," she simpered, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "And Michael, Rebecca, we're just delighted to have you here." The undercurrent of menace was palpable, but I refused to be cowed. Lifting my chin, I met her gaze head-on. "Thank you for the invitation, Sylvia. It's been too long since we've all gotten together as a family." Her eyes narrowed at my pointed emphasis on the word family, but she said nothing. Richard, however, couldn't resist taking a jab. "Yes, well, some of us have a rather skewed definition of what family means, don't we, dear?" The barb was clearly aimed at me, but I refused to rise to the bait. Instead, I excused myself, making my way toward the bar. If I was going to drop this bombshell, I needed a drink first. As the evening wore on, I bided my time, watching as Richard and Sylvia worked the room, schmoozing and preening like the arrogant snobs they were. Emma, too, held court from her throne-like chair, lording over the proceedings with her usual disdain. Finally, as the cake was being served, I saw my opportunity. Rising from my seat, I clinked my glass, calling for attention. "If I could have everyone's attention, please." The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me. Richard and Sylvia's expressions were guarded, but I could see the unease flickering in their eyes. Drawing a deep breath, I began to speak, my voice ringing out loud and clear. "I want to thank Emma for including me in this wonderful celebration. It's been far too long since we've all been together as a family." I paused, letting the weight of that word sink in. Sylvia's eyes narrowed, but I pressed on. "Of course, I use that term loosely, because while we may be bound by blood and marriage, the sad truth is that this family has been rotting from the inside for years." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd, and I saw Richard tense, his face flushing an angry crimson. But I was on a roll now, the words pouring forth in an unstoppable torrent. "You see, for decades I've endured the cruelty and manipulation of my dear husband and mother-in-law, the emotional abuse, the financial betrayals, the utter lack of respect for me as a human being." Gasps and scandalized whispers filled the air as I laid it all bare. The affairs, the hidden bank accounts, their plans to force me into indentured servitude as Richard's caregiver. By the time I finished, Sylvia's face was ashen, her carefully cultivated facade crumbling around her. Richard, too, looked shell-shocked, as if he couldn't quite believe I'd had the audacity to expose his sins before his entire social circle. For a long, charged moment, the room was utterly silent. Then, like a dam bursting, the outrage and condemnation came pouring forth. "How could you, Richard? Sylvia, you wretched woman! And to think we welcomed you into our homes!" The voices swirled around us, a cacophony of judgment and disdain. Sylvia shrank back, her eyes darting wildly, searching for an ally, a friendly face. But there were none. Even Emma had turned her back, her lips pursed in a thin, disapproving line. As the tumult raged on, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The shackles of shame and secrecy had finally been cast off, the truth laid bare for all to see. Crossing the room, I came to stand before Richard and Sylvia, looking them square in the eye. "It's over," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "Your lies, your manipulations, they've all been exposed. You have no power over me or this family any longer." Sylvia opened her mouth, no doubt to hurl some scathing insult or empty threat. But the words seemed to die in her throat as she took in the scene around her, the accusatory glares, the whispers of disdain. In that moment, I saw the fight go out of her, that indomitable spirit finally broken. She was a fallen queen, her reign of terror at an end. Turning on my heel, I strode from the room, head held high, Michael and Rebecca at my side. As we emerged into the cool evening air, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. At long last, I was free of their toxic influence, their twisted games. And while the road ahead would be long, I knew that I would walk it with strength and dignity, unbowed and unbroken. Revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold, and oh, how sweet it tasted. In the aftermath of Emma's disastrous birthday party, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in decades, I was free from the constant weight of Richard and Sylvia's manipulation. Their toxic influence finally purged from my life. Of course, they didn't go quietly into that good night. Richard bombarded me with calls and emails, alternating between groveling pleas for forgiveness and vitriolic tirades against my supposed betrayal. Sylvia, too, made her fair share of attempts to reassert her control, leaving scathing voicemails that I promptly deleted without listening. But I was done engaging with their drama, their twisted mind games. I had laid bare the truth for all to see, and in doing so, I had regained my power, my sense of self-worth. With Michael and Rebecca's support, I focused on building a new life for myself, one free from the shackles of my past. I found a quaint little apartment in a charming neighborhood, filling it with pieces that brought me joy. Fresh flowers, cozy throws, framed photos of happier times. And as the weeks turned to months, I began to venture out, to rediscover the world beyond the confines of my toxic marriage. I joined a book club at the local library, losing myself in the stories of other resilient women who had faced and overcome their own struggles. I volunteered at a nearby soup kitchen, finding solace in the simple act of serving others. Slowly but surely, I began to heal, to reclaim the parts of myself that had been buried for far too long. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me gave way to a newfound sense of peace, of contentment. Of course, Michael and Rebecca were a constant source of strength and support throughout this journey. They insisted on regular family dinners, filling my little apartment with the sounds of laughter and love. And when Rebecca gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, I was there every step of the way, reveling in the joy of becoming a grandmother. As I cradled that tiny bundle in my arms, gazing into her innocent eyes, I made a silent vow. This child would never know the pain and manipulation that had plagued my own family. She would grow up surrounded by love and respect, her spirit nurtured and cherished. In those quiet moments, rocking my granddaughter to sleep, I found a sense of peace and purpose that had eluded me for far too long. This was what truly mattered. Not the petty squabbles or toxic power plays, but the simple joys of family, of unconditional love. And if Richard and Sylvia ever dared to darken our doorstep again, to try and taint this newfound happiness with their venom, well, they would quickly learn that I was no longer the meek, downtrodden woman they had once taken such delight in tormenting. No, I was a phoenix risen from the ashes of my past, stronger and more resilient than ever before. And I would protect this fragile new life with every fiber of my being, come what may. As the years passed, Richard and Sylvia's attempts at contact grew fewer and farther between. Whether they had finally accepted defeat or simply moved on to tormenting some other poor soul, I neither knew nor cared. They were ghosts of my past, shadows that held no power over me any longer. My focus remained firmly on the present, on cherishing each precious moment with my son, my daughter-in-law, and my beautiful granddaughter. We became a tight-knit clan, bound not by blood or obligation, but by a deep, abiding love and respect. And in those quiet moments, as I watched my family blossom and thrive, I knew that I had won the ultimate victory. Not through rage or vengeance, but through the simple act of living my life on my own terms, unbowed and unbroken. Richard and Sylvia had tried their damnedest to crush my spirit, to strip me of my dignity and self-worth. But in the end, it was their hatred, their pettiness, that had withered and died like a noxious weed starved of sunlight. As for me, I had risen from the ashes, a towering lily in full bloom, my fragrance carrying on the wind as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And that, I knew, was the greatest revenge of all.
It was supposed to be a good day. One of those rare, perfect days you file away to remember when things get hard. My fiancée Kyla and I had decided to share our news at my parents' Sunday dinner, a weekly ritual of dry roast chicken and simmering resentment. My name is Trinity, I'm 29, and for my entire life I've been the understudy in a play starring my older sister Stella. Stella, who is 32, arrived a half-hour late, flashing a diamond that could probably be seen from space. She didn't even wait for everyone to sit down. "Morgan proposed," she announced, thrusting her hand out. My mother, Reagan, shrieked with a sound I hadn't heard since Stella was crowned prom queen. My father, Bryant, stood up and hugged her, his face beaming. "That's my girl," he said, his voice thick with pride. The next 20 minutes were a blur of champagne, frantic calls to relatives, and my mother already scrolling through wedding venues on her phone. I caught Kyler's eye across the room. He gave me a small, encouraging nod. He's a good man, Kyler. At 31, he has a quiet strength that anchors me. He builds custom furniture, and his hands, though often covered in sawdust, are the gentlest I've ever known. I waited for a lull, a tiny pocket of silence, and cleared my throat. "We actually have some news too," I said, my voice feeling small in the cavernous room. I held up my own hand where the simple, elegant ring Kyler had designed himself sat on my finger. Kyler and I are engaged. The reaction was different. My mother's smile tightened. "Oh," she said. "Well, congratulations. How nice." My father clapped Kyler on the shoulder. "Good for you, son. Welcome to the family." It was the same tone he used when I got a B+ on a report card while Stella had gotten an A. Polite, but disappointed. Stella glanced at my ring for a fraction of a second before turning back to our mother. "Mum, I was thinking a spring wedding. Maybe at that chateau out in wine country. We have to book it ASAP." And just like that, I was invisible again. My engagement, my moment, was an inconvenient footnote in the grand production of Stella's life. It was a story I knew by heart. When I was 10, my parents cancelled my small birthday party because it was the same weekend as Stella's regional dance competition. For my high school graduation, they gave me a $100 savings bond. For Stella's, they bought her a car. She went to a private university out of state. I went to the local public college while living at home. The reasoning was always the same. Stella needs the resources to build her future. "You've always been so practical, Trinity. You understand." I didn't understand. I just learned to stop asking. Later, while I was helping clear the table, my mother gushed about Stella's fiancé. "Morgan is just brilliant," she said, loud enough for Kyler to hear from the living room. "He's a senior consultant at a top tech firm. His family has a legacy. This is an investment in Stella's future." She paused, then glanced at Kyler, who was quietly talking to my dad. "Kyler seems like a nice boy." "He's okay, but not very refined, is he? A little rough around the edges." I felt a familiar hot shame creep up my neck. I wanted to scream that Kyler was the most refined man I knew. He valued integrity, honesty, and hard work, not social climbing and empty praise. But I just stacked the plates and said nothing. It was easier that way. It was always easier. As Kyler and I were getting our coats to leave, I went to the kitchen to get a bottle of water for the drive. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard my parents' hushed voices. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. "We'll have to take out a small loan for the venue deposit," my father was saying, his voice strained. "But it's worth it. We have to make a strong impression on Morgan's family." Then my mother's voice, sharp and clinical, cut through the air and straight into my heart. "We'll manage," she said. "Trinity's engagement. That can be low-key." She's used to low-key. The words "she's used to low-key" echoed in my head for weeks. They became the soundtrack to my life as Stella's wedding planning consumed my family like a tidal wave. My mother, Reagan, transformed into a 4-star general commanding an army of one, Stella. They spent their days touring venues, tasting cakes, and debating the precise shade of ivory for the floral arrangements. The chateau, a sprawling estate in wine country that looked like it had been airlifted from the French countryside, was secured within the first week. We had to pull from our retirement savings and take out a small loan for the deposit, my father Bryant told me over the phone, his voice a mixture of martyrdom and pride. "But your sister deserves the best." This is her moment. Meanwhile, Kyler and I sat on the floor of our small apartment, eating pizza from a cardboard box and planning our own wedding on a legal pad. A garden ceremony, I said, circling the words. Maybe at the public botanical gardens. It's beautiful in the spring. Kyla reached over and took my hand. Are you sure that's what you want, Trin? We can afford more if we save for another year. I shook my head, the certainty settling deep in my bones. No, I don't want to wait. And I don't want their help. I don't want their money, their opinions, or their passive-aggressive sighs. This is for us. We'll pay for it ourselves. We don't need anyone's validation. He smiled. That slow, genuine smile that always made me feel safe. Okay, he said. A garden wedding it is. And it felt more real, more meaningful than any chateau ever could. A month later, I was at Stella's bridal shower. It was held in the private room of an expensive downtown restaurant, filled with women in pastel dresses sipping champagne. I felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. Stella was holding court, recounting a dramatic story about her dress fitting while my mother beamed at her side. I was trying to make myself as small as possible in a corner when Reagan cornered me by the gift table. She held a flute of champagne, her knuckles white. Trinity, we need to talk, she said, her voice low and sharp. She steered me toward a small alcove, away from the chatter. Her eyes scanned my simple blue dress, a gift from Kyla, with undisguised disapproval. I'm worried about you, she began, which was her opening line for every lecture I'd ever received. This marriage, it's a mistake. I stared at her, speechless. What are you talking about? Kyla is a labourer, she hissed, as if the word itself was a disease. He works with his hands. His family has no name, no connections. Morgan's family is legacy. Stella is securing her future. You, she said, her gaze sweeping over me with pity, are marrying below your station, in every way. You're throwing your life away on a carpenter. The air left my lungs. All the years of being second best, of being the practical one, of swallowing my hurt, it all coalesced into a single, searing point of pain behind my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that Kyla's hands had built a life for us, that his integrity was worth more than Morgan's entire stock portfolio, but I just stood there, silent, my specialty. Think about your future, Trinity, she finished, her tone softening into faux concern. It's not too late to reconsider. She patted my arm, a gesture devoid of any warmth, and walked back to the party, her smile firmly back in place. I stood in the alcove, my heart hammering against my ribs, feeling the familiar sting of tears I refused to let fall. I pulled out my phone, needing a distraction, a lifeline to the real world. I opened my messages to text Kyla, to tell him I loved him, that he was all that mattered. That's when I saw it. A new message from an unknown number. It was short, just a single sentence. My blood ran cold as I read the words. The chateau's owned by the Zimmermans. My fingers trembled so badly I almost dropped my phone. I read the text again, then a third time, the words glowing in the dim light of the alcove. The chateau's owned by the Zimmermans. It didn't make sense. Kyla's father, Walter, was a quiet, unassuming man. He lived in a modest ranch house, drove a 10-year-old truck, and his idea of a fancy dinner was the local steakhouse. He was successful, Kyla had told me, in commercial real estate, but he never, ever talked about it. I didn't mention the text until Kyla and I were back in our apartment. The scent of champagne and my mother's perfume still clung to my dress. I handed him my phone. He read the message, his brow furrowing. What is this? It came during the shower, I said, my voice barely a whisper. From a number I don't know. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the screen. My dad owns a lot of properties through a holding company, he said slowly. He never uses his own name. He hates the attention. He looked up at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. It's possible. The next day, I called Walter and asked if we could meet for coffee. He agreed without hesitation. We met at a small, no-frills diner halfway between our homes. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth with a black coffee, reading a newspaper. He looked more like a retired high school history teacher than a property mogul. I slid into the booth, my heart pounding. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course, Trinity," he said, folding his paper. "Kyler told me what your mother said to you at the shower. I'm sorry you were subjected to that." His directness caught me off guard. "He did?" Walter nodded, his expression serious. "He was angry and hurt for you. Which is why I thought you should know the truth." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "I had my assistant send you that message. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I figured you deserved all the facts." I just stared at him. "So it's true? You own the chateau?" He gave a small, almost reluctant nod. "I built it 12 years ago. It's a good investment. Kyler and I, we don't flaunt things. It's not how we were raised. But when Kyler told me both you and Stella were getting married, I thought it would be a nice, quiet gesture, a poetic wedding gift to both my son's bride and her sister." He looked me straight in the eye. "I waived the venue fee for your parents, anonymously, of course. They think the manager gave them a discretionary discount for booking so early. The room started to spin. My parents had taken out a loan. They were pulling from their retirement, all for a show. For a property that my unrefined fiancé's family owned outright. The bitter cosmic irony of it was so thick I could barely breathe. I saw the power in it then, a single, undeniable truth that could shatter the entire facade my parents had so carefully constructed. "They don't know," I said, the idea taking root. "They have no idea." "None," Walter confirmed. "And they don't have to. The gift was for you and Kyler. What they do with their end of it is their business." He leaned forward slightly. "But Trinity, if their behaviour is causing you pain, just know the truth is a tool you have every right to use. I met my best friend Zara for a drink that night and told her everything. She listened intently, a slow, wicked grin spreading across her face. 'Oh, this is beautiful,' she said, swirling the ice in her glass. 'This is Shakespearean level stuff.' She looked at me, her eyes sparkling. 'You can't say a word, not yet.' 'What do you mean?' 'Don't you see?' she said, leaning in. 'They're building this entire narrative of sacrifice and class on a foundation of lies. They're bragging about a castle they didn't pay for. You have to let them finish it. Let them build their throne with borrowed bricks. The higher they climb, the harder they'll fall.' Her words settled over me, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of control. I wasn't the victim in their story anymore. I was the narrator. The wedding was 2 months away. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private dining room at the chateau itself. My parents were in their element, gliding through the room, accepting compliments. Stella was radiant, Morgan was stiff, and I was a ghost observing it all. During the toast, my father stood up, glass in hand. He spoke of hard work and providing the best for his children. Then Reagan stood beside him, beaming. "We're just so thrilled to give Stella the wedding she's always dreamed of," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured humility. "We're basically carrying this whole wedding because she deserves it. I mean, look at this venue. A legacy." Across the table, Kyler caught my eye. I took a slow sip of my water and gave him the smallest, faintest smile. The show was just getting started. Watching my parents bask in false glory at the rehearsal dinner unlocked a Pandora's box of memories I had long suppressed. It wasn't just about the big things like the car or the private school tuition. It was the 1,000 tiny cuts, the small daily dismissals that taught me my worth was conditional. I remembered being 8, winning first place in the school science fair with a project I'd spent weeks on. I came home beaming, clutching my blue ribbon. Stella, who was 11, had a ballet recital that same night. My ribbon was taped to the fridge without a word, and we rushed out the door so we wouldn't be late for her performance. After the recital, my parents took her out for ice cream to celebrate. I sat in the back of the car, the sticky sweetness of her victory filling the air while my own achievement dissolved into nothing. I remembered being 17 and getting a partial academic scholarship to the state university. My father had looked at the acceptance letter and said, "That's good, Trinity. It'll help with expenses." A few months later, when Stella decided she wanted to study abroad for a semester in Italy, they cashed out the savings bonds they'd been putting away for my college education to fund her trip. It's a once-in-a-lifetime cultural experience, my mother had explained, as if my 4 years of education were just a line item on a budget. Each memory was a stone, and I had been carrying them for so long I'd forgotten how heavy they were. But now, armed with Walter's secret, the weight was different. It wasn't crushing me anymore. It was ballast. It was channeling all that pain into a quiet, unshakable strength. I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling strategic. The final weeks leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in Stella's self-absorption. The golden child was cracking under the pressure of her own perfect image. She threw a screaming fit at the florist because the peonies were more blush than bashful pink. She made her bridesmaid cry during a dress fitting by loudly announcing she looked like a sausage in seafoam. My mother followed in her wake, smoothing things over with caterers and designers, murmuring, "It's just the pre-wedding jitters. She's a perfectionist." Morgan, Stella's polished fiancé, seemed to be losing his shine. His smiles became tighter, his posture more rigid. During one particularly ugly incident at a cake tasting, where Stella accused the baker of trying to poison her with almond extract, I saw Morgan physically recoil. He looked exhausted. Kyla noticed it too. We were at our apartment one evening, a week before the wedding, addressing invitations for our own small ceremony. He was carefully lettering each envelope while I applied the stamps. "I saw them at that home decor store downtown today," he said, not looking up from his work. She was yelling at him about throw pillows in the middle of the store. He finally paused and met my gaze. "That guy's regretting it. You can hear it in his laugh now. It's hollow." He was right. The effortless charm Morgan had exuded when they first got engaged had been replaced by a strained, brittle politeness. He looked like a man trapped in a gilded cage, and the door was about to be locked. The day before the wedding was the chapel walk-through at the chateau. The place was magnificent, with soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that cast jewel-toned light across the marble floors. Stella was directing the wedding planner with the authority of a drill sergeant. My parents stood by, nodding at her every command. I was standing off to the side, just watching, when my father approached me. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder, his expression grave. "Trinity," he said, his voice low. "Tomorrow is a very important day for this family." For Stella, I waited. "I need you to be graceful. Keep your husband quiet. Don't draw any attention. Just smile and be supportive. Let your sister shine." He squeezed my shoulder as if to emphasize his point. "You've always been good at that." He walked away before I could respond, rejoining my mother and Stella to admire the altar. I stood frozen in a beam of sapphire light, his words echoing in the vast empty space. "You've always been good at that." He said it like a compliment, a testament to my character. But I heard it for what it was, a command to remain in the shadows where I had always been. I looked over at Kyla, who had seen the whole exchange. He gave me a look that said, "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, the cold, still air of the chapel filling my lungs. I nodded back at him. I was more than okay. I was ready. The morning of the wedding was chaos orchestrated by a tyrant. I arrived at the bridal suite at the chateau to find Stella in full bridezilla mode. Hairpins were flying, makeup artists were cowering, and the air was thick with the scent of hairspray and simmering rage. "The mimosas are too pulpy!" she shrieked at a terrified-looking catering assistant. "Are you trying to ruin my entire day?" My mother, Reagan, rushed to her side. "Don't you worry, sweetie. Mommy will handle it." She turned to the young woman. "Get her a new one, now." And strain at this time, I watched the scene from the doorway, a silent observer as always. The staff were scrambling, their faces a mixture of fear and professional resolve. My parents defended every tantrum, excused every insult. They saw a passionate bride demanding perfection. I saw a deeply insecure woman unravelling because, for the first time, the spotlight she craved was burning her. I found a quiet corner to get my own makeup done, keeping my head down and my mouth shut. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was a text from Zara. "You are not going to believe this. Your mother is on a roll." A second text followed immediately. "She's telling Morgan's great aunt that his family was so generous to bless them with the use of this magnificent venue. She's literally taking credit for a gift she never received." I read the message, and a cold clarity washed over me. This wasn't just an omission or an assumption anymore. This was an outright lie. My parents were actively fabricating a story to inflate their own social standing, using Walter's quiet generosity as a prop. They weren't just building a throne on borrowed bricks. They were engraving their own names on them. I felt a sudden need for fresh air. I slipped out of the suite and walked down a long, quiet hallway, my bridesmaid dress rustling against the marble floors. I found a small, secluded balcony overlooking the vineyards. The morning sun was warm on my face. A few minutes later, a calm voice spoke from behind me. "It's a beautiful view from here." I turned to see Walter standing there. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored suit that made him look distinguished but not flashy. Kyla was standing beside him. "It is," I said, managing a small smile. Walter's gaze was kind but perceptive. He could see the tension in my shoulders, the storm behind my eyes. "Are you all right, Trinity?" I took a deep breath. "My mother is telling people that Morgan's family gifted them the venue." Walter's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. Kyla put a steadying hand on my arm. "We can just let it go," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter," Walter said gently. "It matters because it's a lie. And it matters because it's hurting you." He looked out at the rolling hills, the rows of grapevines stretching toward the horizon. "I made this offer to you and Kyla as a gift, a gesture of family. I'm not interested in seeing it used as a tool for social climbing." He turned back to me, his eyes holding mine. "The plan we discussed, it's still an option. I can say something during my toast, but I need you to be sure. If this is still what you want, I'll do it. But once it's said, it can't be undone. The consequences will be real." I thought of my mother's cutting words at the bridal shower. I thought of my father telling me to stay quiet and let my sister shine. I thought of every birthday, every achievement, every part of me that had been minimized to make Stella seem bigger, brighter. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about correction. It was about setting the record straight, not with anger or malice, but with the simple, undeniable weight of the truth. I looked from Walter's steady gaze to Kyla's supportive one. He squeezed my arm gently, leaving the decision entirely to me. I finally had a voice, and I knew exactly how I wanted to use it. I nodded at Walter, my resolve hardening into steel. Let the toast burn the veil. The ceremony was exactly what my parents had paid for. Lavish, excessive, and utterly theatrical. Stella glided down the aisle in a dress that cost more than my car, a serene smile plastered on her face, as if she hadn't been screaming about mimosas just hours before. Morgan waited at the altar, his own smile looking more like a grimace. From my spot in the bridesmaid lineup, I had a perfect view of my parents in the front row, dabbing at their eyes with performative emotion. They weren't watching their daughter get married, they were watching the premiere of a movie they had produced. The reception was even more over the top. A string quartet played in the grand ballroom, ice sculptures melted slowly on buffet tables, and waiters circulated with trays of champagne and caviar. The whole affair felt less like a celebration of love and more like a corporate networking event. My parents took centre stage as soon as the dinner plates were cleared. My father, Bryant, tapped his glass for attention, his chest puffed out. He launched into a rambling speech about family, tradition, and the sacrifices parents make for their children. "When you see your daughter achieve her dreams," he said, gesturing towards Stella, "you know that every sacrifice was worth it. We've always believed in giving our children the foundation they need to build a legacy, and today we see that legacy taking shape." The room applauded politely. My mother, Reagan, then took the microphone, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. She spoke of Stella's grace and beauty, and then turned her attention to Morgan's family. "And we are so, so grateful," she said, looking directly at Morgan's parents, "for the incredible generosity that has been shown to our family. This beautiful place. It's a testament to what can be achieved when two great families come together." I saw Morgan's mother give his father a slightly confused look. They clearly had no idea what she was talking about. I glanced over at my friend Zara, who was seated at a nearby table. She caught my eye and subtly angled her phone, pretending to adjust something on the table. She was recording. Another friend, Zoe, who had known our family since childhood and had witnessed the favouritism firsthand, was doing the same from the other side of the room. They were my silent witnesses, collecting receipts. Finally, after the best man and maid of honour had given their speeches, the MC announced the final toast of the evening. And now, a few words from the father of the groom's family, Mr. Walter Zimmerman. A quiet ripple of anticipation went through the room. Walter, in his understated suit, looked completely at ease as he walked to the microphone. He wasn't a man who commanded attention with volume, but with presence. He adjusted the mic, his calm demeanour a stark contrast to my parents' theatricality. He started conventionally with warm words about love, marriage and the joining of families. He congratulated Stella and Morgan, his voice smooth and sincere. My parents were beaming, nodding along, completely oblivious. Then he paused. He took a slow sip of water, and the energy in the room shifted. He scanned the crowd until his eyes landed on me and Kyla. He gave us a small, almost imperceptible smile. He raised his glass. "Let's talk about what a gift truly is." "A true gift," Walter continued, his voice even and calm, resonating through the suddenly quiet ballroom, "is given without expectation of praise. It's a quiet gesture, meant to support, not to be a monument to one's own generosity." He turned his gaze slightly, a subtle shift that seemed to encompass both Stella and me. "When my son Kyla told me that both of the Matthews daughters were getting married this year, I was overjoyed. Family is everything to us. And in our family, we believe in treating our children's partners as our own." He paused again, letting the words hang in the air. My mother was still smiling, but it was a brittle, confused expression. My father's hand, holding his champagne flute, had frozen halfway to his mouth. "And so," Walter said, his voice ringing with clarity, "we were proud to gift the use of our venue, this beautiful chateau, to both our future daughters-in-law for their weddings. Anonymously, of course." A collective gasp rippled through the room. It was a soft, sharp sound, like 100 people sucking in their breath at once. Stella's perfectly made-up face went slack with shock. Her hand, clutching her bouquet of blush peonies, went limp, and the flowers tumbled to the floor with a soft thud. Walter wasn't finished. He looked directly at me, his expression softening with genuine warmth. "I especially want to thank Trinity," he said, his voice full of paternal pride I'd never once heard from my own father. "Thank you for your grace, for your integrity, and for never once asking your parents for a dime to fund your own wedding, choosing instead to build your future on your own terms, with your own hard work. You and Kyla are a testament to what a true partnership looks like. We are so proud to welcome you into our family." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with shock and dawning horror. Every eye in the room darted between Walter, my parents, and me. I didn't look at them. I kept my gaze straight ahead, my hands folded quietly in Kyla's lap under the table. His thumb stroked the back of my hand, a steady, grounding presence. I saw my father's face go completely pale, the colour draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. My mother, Reagan, made a small choking sound and took a gulp of her wine, some of it sloshing over the rim of the glass onto the white tablecloth. Then, in a single, deliberate movement, Morgan removed his arm from around Stella's waist. He took a small step away from her, creating a physical distance that was as loud as a scream. Zara, sitting at the next table, leaned over and whispered in my ear, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. That was biblical. The spell was broken. A low murmur erupted across the ballroom as guests began whispering to each other, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. The lie, so carefully constructed, had been dismantled with a few simple, honest sentences. My mother couldn't take it. She pushed her chair back with a screech, the sound grating in the tense quiet. Without a word, she turned and stormed out of the ballroom, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. A few of her closest relatives, looking deeply uncomfortable, hesitated for a moment before scurrying out after her. The great performance was over, and the producers were fleeing the theatre. The wedding didn't so much end as it did collapse. After my mother's dramatic exit, the atmosphere became unbearably awkward. The band played a few half-hearted songs to a near-empty dance floor before packing up early. Stella was last seen being led away by a bridesmaid, her face streaked with mascara. Morgan had simply vanished. Kyla and I slipped out quietly, the chaos of their implosion fading behind us. The aftermath was a slow-motion car crash, relayed to me in bits and pieces through text from Zara and a few guilt-ridden relatives. Morgan, as Kyla had predicted, was taking time to re-evaluate. The word from his family was that the engagement was off. Stella, stripped of her fiancé and her carefully crafted image, was spiralling, refusing to leave her room at my parents' house. My mother, Reagan, was on a rampage, calling relatives to spin a new narrative about how Walter had humiliated them, how they'd been cruelly deceived. But the truth was out, and it had more power than her lies ever did. My phone, which had been silent for years except for obligatory holiday texts, started buzzing with messages from cousins and aunts. "I'm so sorry for how they've always treated you. You handled that with so much class." Even a few of Stella's bridesmaids reached out. They didn't offer apologies, but they started following me on social media, their sudden curiosity a quiet admission that they were finally seeing the real story. For the first time, I wasn't an afterthought. I was a person. Kyla and I returned to our world. It was a world of sawdust and sunlight in our small apartment, of quiet dinners and easy laughter. It was modest and real, built on a foundation of respect, not performance. A few weeks after the wedding that wasn't, we got married at the Botanical Gardens on a perfect spring afternoon. It was a small ceremony with just Kyla's family and a handful of our closest friends. Walter walked me down the aisle. There was no grand reception, no ice sculptures, just a joyful backyard barbecue at Walter's house. It was low-key, and it was perfect. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't even feel triumphant. What I felt was a profound sense of clarity, as if a fog I'd been living in my whole life had finally lifted. The anger and resentment I had carried for so long had been replaced by a quiet, peaceful emptiness. I wasn't defined by their approval, or the lack of it. I was just me, and that was enough. One evening, about a month after our wedding, Zara sent me a link. It was a video, pieced together from the clips she and Zoe had taken at the reception. It starts with my father's speech about sacrifice, then my mother's gushing lies about generosity, before cutting seamlessly to Walter's calm, devastating toast. The camera work was shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. It had been posted on a local wedding-shaming forum and had, in the parlance of the internet, gone viral. I watched it, curled up on the sofa next to Kyla. I saw my parents' faces shift from pride to confusion to horror. I saw Stella's bouquet fall. I saw Morgan step away. And then, at the very end, the camera zoomed in on me for just a second. I was looking straight ahead, my expression unreadable, but as Walter finished speaking, the faintest hint of a smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of victory, but of release. It was the smile of a woman who was finally being seen, not as a shadow, but on her own terms. All it took was truth, patience, and karma, wearing a borrowed crown.